You will be getting a notification that I am recording. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this masterclass on the power of being present, meditation. I'm very grateful you are here, whether you're here live with us or you're watching this later, as I know a few of you probably will be. Thank you for being here. So over the last few weeks in particular, I have been thinking about how to be most helpful, be of service, in terms of helping all of us who are on our wellness journeys to really practice tools and or practices, if you will, which may be tools, to really optimize our health and wellness. And I think that over the course of the next few months, we're going to be really focused on those tools or those practices, not only because I think that they're great tools for all of us to do, but also so that we can dive into other layers of information and layers of understanding, awareness about who we are and how we operate, so that we can make shifts or changes as necessary. And so the focus of this masterclass is really to talk about not only some of the benefits, but also some of those things that we can start to learn about ourselves through the practice of meditation. And so thank you for being here. I think it's important to maybe consider, there we go. It started to go off on me. I think it's important to consider for a moment that, the name or the title of this is about being present. And so I'm going to ask you, to maybe consider being present for the next little while we discuss this. At any point, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I think there's actually a Q&A question too, but let's keep it to the chat, and I will check in occasionally throughout the presentation to answer any questions that people have. I'll also leave a little bit of time at the end if anybody has anything, but certainly feel free to do so. You can also email me afterwards if you're watching this as a recording and you have some questions that come up. By all means, hit reply to the email that you were sent and ask away. Okay, so let's take a moment. We're doing a masterclass on meditation, so let's take a moment to be with ourselves, be with our inner worlds right now. Whether you choose to close your eyes or soften your gaze away from the screen, that's completely up to you. But sit with a tall spine, strong skeleton as our support system, a soft belly. And be with yourself in this moment. Perhaps take a couple of breaths fully, consciously. Inhaling, slowly exhaling, allowing the exhale to be just a little bit longer, linger in the exhale. And as you do so, maybe take a moment and just scan your body. Checking in with yourself in this moment, checking in how you're doing. What might you need? Shifts, perhaps, movement, or perhaps just more stillness. And whenever you're ready, coming back, being here. And I thank you. I think so often we think of meditation as having to sit for 30 or 45 minutes, and certainly that is a wonderful practice and practices that we do as well. But sometimes it's just taking those moments throughout our day to just stop and reset. Reset by taking a few breaths and allowing ourselves to settle so that we might engage again in the now, in the present moment, and not caught up in some other space of past, present, or past or future. So let's begin by answering a question. For you at this point in your life, what do you think it takes to be well and thrive? What does it take to feel well, to be well, however you might define that, and to thrive? You know, we hear this quote often, you know, living your best life. Are you? And if you are, good for you. And if you're not, what do you think you might need? As we think about these things, commitment to self, yeah. Some of the things that come up often are like knowing thyself a little bit more. And that might be, by the way, about commitment or really doing the things that we need to do. It might be about connection to others, purpose and meaning in our life, having and allowing ourselves positive emotions, using our strengths and our gifts to our fullest potential. A lot of it is around this idea of living to our potential. And of course, having the vitality and the energy in which to do it. So these are but a few of the things that we know from research that allows us to thrive, to be resilient, to be committed, to know thyself, to be aware, to not be caught up in or a prisoner to the conditions of our mind. So as we think about this a little further, it's like, okay, well, let's go back to what we're talking about tonight, which is meditation. So what is meditation? What is it? It's a very simple idea and yet so complex and elusive, if you will. But at the end of the day, meditation is mental training. Mental training. So Jack Kornfield talks about meditation as the art of awakening. And I want to read this quote to you, although it seemingly is long, it's a good one. Meditation can be thought of as the art of awakening. Through the mastery of this art, we can learn new ways to approach our difficulties and bring wisdom and joy alive in our life. Through developing meditation tools and practices, we can awaken to the best of our spiritual and human capacities. The key to this art is the steadiness of our attention. Steadiness of our attention. When the fullness of our attention is cultivated together with a grateful and tender heart, our spiritual life will naturally grow. The other, definition, if you will, from Tara Brach, these are two of my core teachers these days. Meditation is mental training. Meditation is commonly described as a training of mental attention, that word again, attention, that awakens us beyond the conditioned mind and habitual thinking and reveals the nature of reality. This is a more condensed version of a similar idea. And yet, as simple as it may sound, it is so profound, so profound. And so there's a couple of common elements here. Of course, mental attention, our ability to be attending to the present moment, but as well as this idea of awakening. And so what are we awakening to? As we think about awareness, if you ever can reflect on perhaps whatever degree of self-awareness you believe you have in this moment, in this time, think about a time when maybe you didn't have that. And often, we're in almost a trance-like state of so enmeshed with our thoughts that we don't recognize until we do some work, some inner work, some practice to start to cultivate and recognize that we are more than our thoughts, that we, in fact, the I, the self, can see the thoughts, can be aware of the thoughts. And since we can be aware of the thoughts, we are not the thoughts, right? And so when we start to see that, we can start to then become more aware of the conditioning of our mind. The conditioning of the mind. So the condition of the mind is to think. That's its purpose, if you will. And so the mind thinks, just like the heart beats and the lungs, expand and contract for oxygen. And obviously a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to leave it at that. Right? There is a function, if you will, to the parts of us. And the condition of the mind, or the function of the mind, is to think. And so when we start to be in relationship with the mind in that way, we can start to recognize again that I am separate from the mind, even though, of course, the mind is part of us. And we can start to realize, if you will, the habits, the patterns that emerge in terms of how we feel and our behavior, our urges, if you will. And this is a really important thing, certainly in moments of stillness, as we'll talk about in a bit. In moments of stillness, it all kind of bubbles up to the surface. And if we give it time, we start to recognize the similar urges and patterns and habits coming up. So let's think about I'm going to cover some of the benefits of meditation. There is way more. I kind of lump them into some different categories that seem to make sense. And certainly if we were all together in a room right now, we could probably brainstorm 20, 30, 40 things, benefits that we've heard about. And certainly there have been, at this point, thousands of research articles and studies done on meditation, on mindfulness, and its positive effects on the human condition, on the human. So some of them, mentally, it enhances concentration. For this simple fact that we mentioned earlier, right? It requires our attention. So it starts to hone our attention. And of course, when we have focused attention, it enhances our concentration. And certainly for people who maybe are have ADHD or other, anxiety is another one. Things that really, they have a hard time focusing for longer periods of time. It comes with lots of things, including aging, where sometimes we get foggy brain, we have a harder time concentrating or focusing. Grief also. We often, after periods of intense grief, have a hard time focusing. And so one of the benefits of meditation is enhancing that, is allowing us perhaps a longer period of time where we can focus and concentrate. There's wonderful sleep benefits to meditation. Often we encourage people to do progressive relaxation and meditation practices before bed in order to be able to fall asleep, but also to stay asleep for longer periods of time. And of course, sleep is another tool that we'll be talking about in a couple of months, and we'll have a masterclass on that and all of the really essential things around sleep that we don't even probably think about, and certainly some research coming out to really show the importance of this as primary for our health and wellness. And of course, it promotes healthy cognitive aging. What does this mean? Well, it keeps our brain working, right? And so the more that we're engaged in mental training, not unlike, Wordle or Sudoku or things like that, that it, I will talk about progressive meditation in a little bit. Progressive relaxation as a meditation strategy. And you probably have, Chantal, you just don't realize it. A body scan can sometimes be a progressive relaxation where we're moving through, and certainly hypnosis. That's often what happens in a hypnosis, whether through self-hypnosis or in a group or one-on-one session. Okay, so those are some of the mental ones. Physical ones: maintain healthy blood pressure. It's interesting, normal cholesterol levels. Assisting in pain management. I'll come back to the third one, but the first two, cardiac health, so important to all of us, but especially as we age. And meditation has been shown to really promote more healthy levels of blood pressure, because of course we're learning how to calm, right, and stay in that calming state. But also, interestingly, normal cholesterol levels, so normal or healthy cardiac function. And assisting in pain management. Many people have probably heard of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that was developed out of Massachusetts University. John Kabat-Zinn and his work there, which has really been instrumental, if you will, in bringing mindfulness into the mainstream, but also into healthcare, and realizing those who are dealing with chronic pain, that mindfulness in particular can really assist in managing pain and reducing the need for narcotics. Or not that they wouldn't have narcotics, but it decreases the amount and the severity of those drugs. Okay, spiritually. I think one of the most important, at least from my perspective, is that when we can get rid of the clutter, pardon me, the chatter of the mind, and we can start to move our way through the obstacles of the mind, we can find our place in the seat of the soul, in our heart space. Now, whatever word you want to put to it, it can be this sense of higher self, higher power, soul, divine connection, whatever word you like to put to it, that kind of works for you, please do so. But it's kind of this inner connection to our intuitive soul, where we can be, asking questions, if you will, and listening to that soft voice answer that comes in our heart space. And we've also noted from a spiritual perspective, I'm not sure this is spiritual necessarily, but this connection between our mind and our body. And often, we talk about these things as if they were unique, that they were separate. And of course, we are one. Our mind is a part of our body, but often there's this disconnect between head and heart. And I'm going to also include gut. So, the head in the gut, and then in the middle is this heart space. And so we want to have this alignment. And we know when we're in moments of stillness, we have a stronger connection between all three. Certainly, we live in a world, as I've mentioned previously in many other master classes, about stress and the impact of chronic stress on our body, as this means almost where we create our own body as a threat to us. So our threats aren't always external, they can also be internal. And so we can become, or the way we talk about ourselves, or the way that our relationship to our body, to ourselves, can become the threat in which keeps us in this chronic stress state. And so a lot of people in this world, at least in Western the Western part of the world, live in our heads. We really talk a lot about the intellect. The thinking mind is really promoted often to the neglect of the body and the wisdom that's held within our heart space, but also in our body. And that meditation and mindfulness practices can really create this connection between all. So this is the $1 million question, right? Where's the disconnect? Pardon me, I realized I missed one here. Emotional, that there's relief from stress, that there's more kindness, there's more compassion, there's all of more joy often as a result, as some of the additional benefits. And then, of course, what's the disconnect? Where's the disconnect here? If we know all of these benefits and more, I'm sure we could list many more, how it can help us thrive and be well, then why aren't we doing it? Right? Why aren't we doing it? And so if you aren't doing a spiritual practice, or pardon me, a meditation practice right now, why not? Why not? Can you answer that question? Often when I say I'm going to do a meditation class or, anything, people are like, oh yeah, I really need to do that. Not unlike, by the way, I really need to move my body or exercise or eat more greens. Like we as a collective, for the most part, most people have a pretty good idea about what they're supposed to do in order for them to feel better, to be well, to have the energy and vitality, right? It's like the same question can be asked, why don't you get 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep every night, or eat a healthy, balanced diet filled with vegetables, or exercise 3 to 5 times a week, or get up and move your body during the day instead of sitting all day in front of a computer, or even putting your phone away once in a while. Why don't you find a job that you love, or say no to things that you don't want to? There's lots of things that we do and engage in our daily life that either hinder us from our own wellness journey, or we don't do the things that we could be doing. When we're faced with what to eat, do we snack on the pizza and chips? I think those are Pringles. Or do we make ourselves a smoothie, as this really simple example, right? What are we reaching for? What are we doing? And what's the difference between these two people? Now, there's nothing wrong with having, I don't know if those are M&Ms or Skittles or whatever they are, right? There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But when we're making those choices on a consistent basis, when that becomes our habits, the outcome then is feeling lethargic, not having the energy to do things in our life, probably a pretty negative self-critic inside that's beating themselves up about why they made the choices. Although it might feel really good in the moment, because, who doesn't love a good carb? It doesn't necessarily, right, make us feel good in the longer term. And so there is this thing that's happening in the world around us that's about this instant gratification, whether it's because of our phone or because we're just so used, or Amazon, at our fingertips, we can have something within a day or two delivered to us. And there isn't the same waiting for things, right? Where we want it now. We want it now. And so when we have an urge, right, or craving for something, we reach for it because we want it. And we can fulfill that need in that moment without necessarily prolonging it, right, pushing it aside, not indulging, and allowing ourselves to make choices that are really around what's best for us. So in Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about this model, and I want to talk about it because I think our mindset is so important as we develop habits that really support our wellness. And this month, or the month of May, as we talk about meditation, we'll also be talking about mindset hand in hand with it, because they're so important, as well as mastery. And mastery is all about practice, right? You do not become a master pianist by not practicing. And with that also comes sacrifice, right? The choice before us of, which choice, the smoothie or the Pringles, what are you doing? If you're constantly making choices like the Pringles, you're probably not going to be an Olympic athlete, as an example, right? Because you have to fuel your body in order to do that which you wish to do. So as it relates to your health and wellness, think about the outcomes that you want. We want usually to be able to realize all these benefits that I just listed and then more, right? We want to be able to have better concentration and age well with a lot of our minds still intact. We want to be able to be emotionally regulated and to feel more sense of joy and happiness in our lives and all of those other great things. So if the outcome is, then where's the disconnect to the process and the habits and the identity? Well, it's really about going through the process, the habits and the systems that make it a reality. Yes. But it's also more than that, because let's face it, if you, like most people, on January 1st have made a commitment to, I'm going to get in shape. This is going to be the year I become the fittest I've ever been, right? And typically, having managed a yoga studio, first week of January, right? All the people come in, they sign up. And by about the third week of January, people start to filter away and you don't see them. Some of them stay though. So what's the difference between the two? Partly, okay, the habits and the systems that we can create that really support the outcome. But part of it is how they view themselves, right? The belief structures that they have about who they are and the people around them and what they're capable of doing, right? It's about laying down the foundation, if you will, brick by brick by brick, that really helps us achieve and grow into, right, the wall, the building, whatever he's making here. And so it doesn't necessarily start with just the habits. In fact, for those people who succeed in building practices and realizing the outcomes, it's about potentially what they believe about themselves. So what do you believe about yourself? Who are you? And who are you in relation to your health and wellness habits? Right? What do I mean by that? Well, what beliefs do you have? So, Chantel, I'm sorry to pick on you, but you had mentioned, more commitment to self, right? So it's like, well, does that mean by virtue that you don't have a commitment to yourself, or you're not really good at it? Like, do you have a belief that maybe you're not as reliable or committed to yourself and to your wellness? And what other, if you started to piece that away, what other beliefs might be there that create an obstacle, right? Create an obstacle about it. So let me give you an example. You are capable of doing many things, and most people are capable of achieving all of the benefits of meditation. There's very few that I can think of. Maybe there's an exception, and therefore I'm not going to say all, but most people can. And the obstacle is what you tell yourself about you. I'm going to give you an example. Often when I talk about meditation with people, it'll come up once in a while. Well, oh yeah, I tried that once. It's not for me. I can't meditate. I'm like, you can't meditate. Meditating is pretty much just sitting. I'm sure you can do that. Most people do that 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Oh, well, you just have to be still. Oh yeah, but I can't, my mind's just it goes too much. Well, yeah, the mind is a chatterbox, especially when we don't train it. I know some of you probably have pets. So think about if you had a dog and you didn't train the dog, right? And they just grew up and running wild, right? And then you go, oh, well, you can't blame it on the dog. You have to take responsibility and go, the dog is behaving that way because I didn't train it. And the mind is kind of the same thing. We need to train the mind to do what it's meant to do, which is to think, but not to run the show. Its job is not to run the show. That's your job. And so you get to decide what you tell yourself about you. And often what happens is we take on all of these things from other people. We have one experience of something, it didn't work, therefore I'm going to drop it. And it's like, well, most things actually take practice. And if you're listening to this and you're a client of mine, you're probably rolling your eyes because, I say this all the time, but it's about practice. The betterment of ourselves do not just come because we go, I think I'm going to be better today, so today's going to be better. It's like, no, it's through the intentions that we set. Yes, our ability to recover from the moments when it doesn't go that way, which it will, right? Our ability to recover, which we're going to talk about, as well as just the practice becomes the mastery. The practice becomes the mastery. It's, the thought is 10,000 hours, 10,000 hours to become a master, 10,000 hours to become a master at something. And so it is in the practice, the consistent practice, I might add, right, that we learn, that we achieve the benefit. So then it becomes, well, what do you tell yourself about what you're capable of? So for instance, do you say, I'm a really healthy person and I make good choices? Or do you tell yourself something else, right? Do you say, well, that's a really hard thing and I can't really do hard things? You can't do hard things. You can do hard things. We can all do hard things. We might not want to do hard things. We might not like doing hard things, but you can do hard things. And there's something really wonderful when we do that, when we commit to a practice, when we sit and we start to realize the benefits, it starts to shift how we feel about ourselves. Why? Because all of a sudden we're like, I did that hard thing. And we start to then have an experience of ourselves that's different than, oh, I gave up again, right? Mindfulness, mindset, mastery. Mindfulness is really around this idea of building awareness. We have to have awareness before we can see what our mindset is, right? Where our resistance is, where those obstacles are, where we're kind of having an urge to, the mind telling us the stories of, this is stupid, I don't want to be here, you have better things to do, right? All of those things is the mind's chatter to get us away from what we're doing, which is learning how to master our mind, to be the master of our mind, to not allow our mind to master us. Okay, so let's talk about some of the principles of practice. When it comes to meditation, again, kind of going back to what we just talked about, it's like, can you identify someone who meditates, someone who cares for themselves, a healthy person, whatever that is, like identifying a belief structure about yourself as a primary, even if it's not perfect, it doesn't need to be perfect. We're not talking about perfection here, right? We're talking about, I'm someone who meditates, right? And then establishing an attitude of what Pema Chodron calls the unconditional friendliness of practice. And what does that mean? It means being really kind to yourself as you move through it unconditionally. Doesn't matter what happens. There'll be good moments, bad moments, pleasant moments, unpleasant moments. It's all good. It's all a lesson. And so when we bring unconditional friendliness, kindness, lovingness to our practice, to ourselves in the practice, we start to cultivate self-compassion. We start to actually practice those things that allow us to be more joyful, happy, and compassionate beings. We can set up the process for a successful habit, right? So habits are the things that we do on repeat. Frequency matters when we're looking at habits. Frequency matters. The time or the duration does not matter as much as frequency does. And of course, we know that setting certain things up that we'll talk about in a minute, really allow us to make it easier for ourselves to be successful. Sometimes we need to get out of our own way of being successful. Often that's the case, by the way, right? We end up creating so many obstacles or so many things, that hoops to go through in order to get to the place we wanted to be, or the habit that we want to do, the practice that we want to do, that we make it so much harder for ourselves. So, case in point, if you want to start running in the morning or working out or whatnot, setting up your shoes and your clothes next to your bed, so when you open your eyes, you see it. It's like first step, right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, get out of bed, put on the shoes, the clothes, and go and work out. As opposed to saying, yeah, I'll get to it, not doing that, you may end up doing your autopilot morning routine and then going, oh yeah, I forgot I was going to work out in the morning, right? So we want to set up visual cues and practices that really support our habits, or the creation of new habits. Posture, positioning, intention, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. These are 3 really important parts of our practice principles. Our posture of how we sit, the positioning of things, and the intention in which we're coming, unconditional friendliness again. And this idea of natural presence. So again, the power of being present, the power of being present. I talked a little bit about this in Sunday morning mindful practice, but there's this beautiful thing when we're present with ourselves, with others. When we start to be in our own present moment awareness, we can be with what is, and from that unfolds this idea of acceptance, or this feeling of acceptance. We cultivate the practice of accepting whatever is happening in that moment. The reality, it is what it is, right? Whether pleasant or unpleasant, we just learn how to be with it, to accept it. There's this idea, Tara Brach talks about, Ram Dass would call it loving awareness. She calls it this idea of presence. So what happens when you deepen your meditation practice, and probably one of the most beautiful benefits is, you get into this other space and time where there is no grasping for things, there's no attachment to, there is like this opening of space and time. And often it's but for glimpses of this in practice, where you might have a moment or two. Of course, as soon as you think, oh my gosh, I'm there, having this moment, you're out of it, because the thinking mind kicks in, and now you're off somewhere else, and then you're like, darn, okay, so that you get there again. And in yoga practice, we might call it nirvana. There's lots of words for it, but it is really this bliss state that we can be in, this place of just presence, with unconditionally present, without any attachment to anything else. And this really, again, helps us to be in the moment of things, to accept life and its challenges in a way that isn't about, why is this happening? Or why is this happening to me? But simply, this is happening. And that we can be in relationship to it from a place that is unwavering in terms of who we are and how we're approaching this. And it's a powerful place to be. And in fact, it is very empowering. We are in our power in that moment. Okay. So we practice meditation by receiving all the domains of experience, right? Which we'll talk about in a second. So mindfulness in particular is this, with a mindful and open attention to what is happening, the unfolding experience in this present moment, to our breath, and all of the sensations of our breath, like the subtle movement, perhaps feeling it in our nostrils, our body, our belly, the feelings that come up, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, our sense perceptions, right? What we see, what we hear, what we smell, our thoughts and emotions that arise, and awareness itself. And this is kind of what we practice on, if you will, as we move through different practices of meditation. It may be more on one than another, but really we're cultivating all of these things so that we can be with this present moment without judgment and with unconditional friendliness. So there are things that we can do that support our practice of coming into this natural presence, this loving awareness, this place of nirvana, bliss, whatever we would like to call it. So meditation is the means to which to get there, or the practice itself. And then there are these supporting tools, if you will, that we can incorporate that allow us to perhaps get to that place of nirvana, bliss, natural presence more likely. And so we can go through some of these things. So, often I think the tools or the supports, the strategies, let's call it, the strategies that we employ often get misrepresented as meditation itself, but it is simply the means by which we're trying to get at something, which is the goal, which is natural presence, which is this bliss state. And so there are specific strategies. For instance, the reason why we sit, often at least, there are, of course, meditation practices where we don't, like yoga nidra, where we're laying down, but for the most part, we are in a seated position. And part of that is because we want to be alert. We want to be alert. We want to be awake in that process. And so in our posture, we're using the skeleton of our body to provide the supports for us to be with our body sensations, the senses, the movements. So some of the strategies include, often at the beginning of practice, we'll make movements or adjustments. Sometimes in yoga, of course, we do asana, not because it's a great, it is a good thing to do, but asana is not yoga, right? Asana is, or postures, if you will, the yoga postures that we move through, is the means through which we can, be in our body and adjust so that we can sit in meditation. So making any movement or adjustment, right, so that we can get rid maybe of the adrenaline, we can make sure that we can sit for long periods of time if that is our choice in that moment. The second one is to be in the body. So this could be a body scan. it can be a very quick one, of just checking in with the body and noticing what's happening. If you've been in meditations with me, I'll often guide people through this, of just checking in. Do you need to make any movements? How are you feeling? Using your senses is another way. This is a really important way for those people from a trauma-informed perspective. This may be their practice, is just touching into their body, touching into their senses and hearing, to start to cultivate a relationship with your body that is safe. Because often when we've endured trauma related to our body doesn't become a safe space anymore. And so we have to reconnect, if you will, in really safe and simple and touch points. It's almost like dipping our toe in. So this can be the practice itself for many people. The next one might be anchors. So we do this often with breath, right? We draw our attention to where we feel our breath the most. Is it the nostrils, the throat, the chest, the belly? We might place hand on chest or belly to help us sense the movement of the body as we breathe, as an anchor for the mind, right? We want to give the mind something to do. Remember, the condition of the mind is to think. So if we give it a job to do, it's more than focused on that it can allow us to be with whatever it is we're focusing on. Recovery and reminding. All of, meditation is this constant relationship with going into story, recognizing our thought and bringing back, right? So there's this natural resiliency that we learn, recovery, when we do a meditation practice. It is the nature of the mind to chatter. So there is, we might go longer periods between the chatter for sure as we practice more and become more of that master over it. But in particular at the beginning, but even just on days where we're busy, we're stressed, we have lots going on, we can often spend all of a 20-minute practice just going out, coming back, right? Recognizing we're caught up in a thought, bringing it back. Of course, different strategies like concentration and focus. So using a candle, using a mantra, using chanting, all of these things can really help us in focusing our attention. Loving kindness can also be a strategy to cultivate that unconditional friendliness within us and in relationship to others. And even self-inquiry, which is definitely a mindfulness practice of just checking in with ourselves, asking maybe perhaps big questions. Who am I? How am I? How am I? If you took a moment right now and closed your eyes and asked yourself, how am I? What do I need right now? And the issue is not so much in asking the question. The practice is in listening for the response. And sometimes we need to get really, really quiet in order to hear it. Because the answer comes from this heart space. Often I have clients and I ask them, what do you need? And they just look at me like, because they have no idea what they need. They are either constantly taking care of other people in their lives, that they don't spend any time in relationship to themselves, or they don't spend any time listening to what they actually need. They just do what they think they're supposed to be doing. And so meditation can really allow us to build this new relationship with ourselves that can allow us to ask those questions like, what do I need? And potentially hear the answer in that quiet voice that comes to us from our heart space. Okay, let's see if, now, in Buddhist texts, we talk about 5 hindrances. And I included this here, and certainly if you do the 31 days of meditation with us next month, I'll talk more about these. But there's 5 hindrances. Grasping, right? We're grasping at something. We're having aversion. That's often anger, resentment, frustration, that kind of thing. We're pushing away, right? We're having an aversion to it. There's restlessness, right? That's the one that comes up quite often for new people, new people who are new to meditating. Sloth, those moments perhaps where you just don't have the energy, you're really tired, just right? And it's harder to concentrate and to be in that, because we really do need to have the posture of being alert and awake. And then doubt, like, oh, I don't think this works for me, and what am I doing here, right? The chatter of the mind, again, these are all hindrances. What does that mean? It's an obstacle in our way. It's perhaps the ego, if you will, trying to keep us doing the same thing and not do anything new, right? The ego doesn't like us doing new things. It likes the familiar safe, even if those safe or those familiar things are not good for us, it doesn't matter. And so this is part of the obstacle that we have to navigate in order to get to this state of realizing the benefits. It is, for lack of a better word, the reward after we've managed to navigate our way through this obstacle course of hindrances. So it's important to know that these are very common to most people who meditate, even people who, these still come up for me after meditating for, 30 years, still come up. But I recognize them more now than perhaps I did at the beginning of my journey. The beginning of your journey, right? We take these things as an excuse or a rationalization for why we can't do something, right? I can't sit still that long, right? Restlessness. And in fact, restlessness is the me, and right, when we start to see it as just another obstacle, we realize, okay, well, we need to do something, employ a strategy to help release some of that adrenaline, move the body so that you become a little more calm in order to be able to sit, as an example. So what are some of the issues that come up for people? Of course, hindrances are one. Biggest one by all is lost in thought and story, right? Again, the condition of the mind is to think. So depending on the day, how quiet, the mind is versus the chitter chatter that's going on, this is a really easy one. And this is the one that allows us, there's an issue, but here's the reward. We learn how to recover. We learn how to catch ourselves and to become the observer of the thoughts and stories in our mind, which is really important and helpful, because the stories, of course, also are indicative of our nervous system and what's happening internally. So we can go, oh, I'm really activated right now. I need to help myself calm. And so then we can employ specific tools and strategies to support ourselves. Pain or discomfort can be, and certainly it's an issue if you're sitting and you're feeling a degree of discomfort. It's going to be really hard to be in this state of mindfulness or concentration. And so it's really important that we care or tend to our body as needed. And of course, our mindset. So what are we thinking about this, right? Oh, this is stupid. I don't know why I'm doing this, right? This kind of attitude towards it is certainly going to impact how we feel and our ability to be with it and to sustain a practice. So how do we sustain a practice? Well, here's a few things, and certainly there's lots of others, but it's best to pick a time of day and commit to that time of day. Now, do you have to? No. Is mornings better than nights? No, right? The best time of day to do it is the time that's right for you, that you can commit doing it, okay? So if that's at 1 p.m., right, because your workday kind of allows you that, then that's great. If it's when you wake up in the morning, great. If it's just before you go to bed, great. If it's any other time, fine. Find a space, whether at home, work, wherever you might be, right, that you can dedicate to it. And this space does not have to be big. It does not have to be a fancy. It can be a cushion. It can be a chair. It can be whatever, right? Again, it doesn't have to be a cushion on the floor either. It can be certainly a chair. But create a little space for yourself that you know, it's again that visual reminder of this space is for me to go and to be with myself. Frequency matters. So doing it every day for 5 minutes is better and more likely to generate and sustain a habit than doing it once a week for 30 minutes. Try it with a group. You know, especially if you're new, practicing in a group is a really helpful way to actually meditate. Why? Because there's something about a group practice, especially when someone's leading it, that, you know, we can kind of get away from our own chatter of our mind. People will often say, you know, oh, I don't even think I can do that for 5 minutes. But in a group, you know, they can go 15 minutes and they're surprised with themselves. And that actually then helps them have the experience. Well, I did it for 15 minutes. I can do it again, right? So when we have specific practices like that or experiences like that, it builds the confidence in ourselves. Practice self-compassion. Remember that unconditional friendliness. The more friendly and kind we are towards ourselves in the practice, the more likely we are to come back to it again. Try something new. If you've tried a specific type of meditation, like Vipassana or TM, and you're like, I don't know if it works for me anymore, try something else. You know, I'm not a big fan of guided meditation, but sometimes it's really nice to have this lovely guided meditation. You know, so try something new, especially if you were exploring and trying to cultivate a different habit. Don't assume that because someone has told you meditation looks a certain way. Try something, try it and see what the experience is for you. And as all habits, it's better when you track it and journal it. What does that mean? Keep a little meditation journal close by. By the way, it can be on your phone. It can be a piece of paper. It can be whatever it is, right? A Google Doc, where you just kind of say, this day, I meditated for this long and this was the experience. Why? Because when you commit to doing it all the time, you can start to see progress. And sometimes we forget how far we've gone because we're just continually looking at where we want to go. And as we see and check in with ourselves and see that we've actually made a significant progress, we're more likely to stay committed and to continue doing the work. You know, 10,000 hours to mastery, 10,000 hours is a long time, right? It's a lot of hours. And in those hours, you have to sacrifice other things. And so you certainly want to feel like you're generating some degree of benefit in order to sustain that level of commitment. So what's the outcome? So I want you to think right now and think of your future self. Who would you be? Who would you be if you meditated every day for the next month? Who would you be? How would you feel? What do you think might happen, right? What do you think are some of the benefits that you might realize? I know, you know, I tend to meditate every day, certainly probably less of a, you know, sit down and meditate for 30 minutes, although I've certainly done that many months and years of my life. Now it tends to be these 5-minute kind of moments, 20 minutes here and there, but I'm going to commit to doing 15 to 30 minutes every day. What can I imagine? I know it's going to be more calming. I know I'm going to be able to manage way more stress and things going on when I do that. Why do I know that? I know that because I've done it before, and that tends to be one of the things that I really notice is that my nervous system just kind of calms. What would that be for you? What do you think that might be? So I invite you to join us on 31 days of meditation in May. Here's what it's going to look like. This is not a challenge where I'm going to say to you, you should meditate every day for the next 31 days. It means we're going to talk about and practice for the next 31 days, for all of May, basically, meditation. And I'm going to invite you to develop a consistent practice, whatever that looks like for you. Knowing frequency matters, right? In terms of building a habit. We're going to have 18 live meditation sessions. They're going to be on Tuesday morning, Thursday noon, and Sundays, our Sunday morning mindful practice. So 3 live sessions every week. Plus, we'll have weekly recorded Q&A and guidance that will support your practice throughout. There's also a library of, I put 10 plus, but quite honestly, there's a considerable amount that's available. So you can kind of test out different practices that kind of work for you. There'll be an ebook kind of guiding you on how to establish a practice. And of course, a community of people that are going to be working through this together. And again, group practices can be a really helpful way of moving through that next level of your meditation practice, if you will. So if you've been kind of doing meditations, but it's been about 10, 15 minutes, and you really kind of want to move on to that 30-minute mark as an example, that might be available to you in a practice, in a community of practice that we'll be developing here. So I invite you all to join. The link will be, I think it's coming up. My transitions tend to be very slow for some reason today, but we'll have it available that you can sign up. It's free to join, right? I just want people to have the experience of practicing this. One of the things, as I mentioned, what we'll be doing throughout the month beyond this is we'll be talking a lot about mindset and mastery as a means of, when we're sitting, of noticing the conditions of our mind, the patterns of our thinking, we can then start to go, oh, I start to see that there's this pattern, right? My hindrance, if you will, or obstacle is that I have this aversion. I always want to kind of escape these practices. And so then it's like, okay, well, if that's kind of your go-to, if you will, how can we start to shift or be with that in a different way? And so the practice is meditation, but we're really trying to understand ourselves better so that we can develop self-care practices that really go to the heart of what we need in order to navigate those obstacles for ourselves. So I'm going to open if there's any questions that you might have. Stop the share. Okay. I just want to go through. There's no other questions, but if there is, let me know. And of course, as I mentioned, I'll be sending this out as a recording to other people. So you might be watching this and it's a recording and not live, so you can ask a question, but just hit reply to the email, ask the question. We'll also, if you belong to the Radical Self-Care community, there'll be a place, if you will, for the meditation challenge where you can ask any questions, and I will, on a weekly basis, do some Q&A around that, as well as potentially even bringing in some other people to talk to them about their practice and what kind of works for them. So on that note, I ran over about 4 minutes. I apologize. I tried to keep it to the hour. Thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it, as always, and I hope it was helpful to you. And I look forward to either hearing about your journey into meditation or having you on our journey in May. Take good care, everyone, and have a good evening.